Nice. Yeah, that tripod came out of a barn. And that's some of their Amazon gear the kids use to make YouTube videos. So I wanted my fellow hospitals to see this. They couldn't all be here. Now let's get this on video. My name is Chris Plummer. I'm the Senior Cybersecurity Analyst at Catholic Medical Center, which is one of New Hampshire's largest hospitals. Today we're going to talk about hospitals. We're going to talk about the Department of Defense. Very specifically, we're going to talk about the United States Navy, where I was an Information Systems and Security Manager for around a 10-year period of time. And the objective of our talk today is to contrast the structure provided to protect our military's IT resources with the structure provided to protect our nation's hospitals. Just very quickly, I don't have a logo. I needed a logo for this presentation, so I went to Twitter and asked them what I should use. There's some great ideas here. The actual Christopher Plummer tearing up the flag, that was a good fact. My friend Nick, though, came up with this Plum. That's my nickname, Plum. This kind of cyber hackery Plum. Let's use that. I thought that was good. So this is the Mark I Ironman. This is the Mark I presentation. It's the first time I've given this presentation. It's the first time I've given a presentation like this. So just like the Mark I Ironman, this is going to get better and cooler as it goes on. But for today, it's just going to be good enough to get like out of the cave. I'm not going to pepper this with too many Marvel references, but we might get a few. First of all, again, this is completely surreal. There are absolute superstars in the InfoSec industry. One of them spoke just over there this morning. I don't know if you saw Kevin's presentation. And you're kind of like, the bar is so high because, again, superstars like Kevin and a lot of others, they're not nearly as public as Kevin, but they do exist online. And then there's me. And it's kind of like, what am I doing here? But I know I'm here, and I'm here to have this conversation about hospitals. And this country has about 5,000 hospitals that serve somewhere around 35 million patients on an annual basis. So talking about hospital security, I'm grateful that Infosecurity North America recognized the importance of this topic and put me on the bill. So, and I thank you all for taking an interest in coming out here today. You know, it's a tough thing to talk about because hospitals are so vulnerable. We don't like to talk about that, but realistically, if we don't keep breaking the ice on this topic, we're not going to make the progress that we need. Anyway, who am I? I'm nobody. I was literally nobody, just another student at the University of New Hampshire. Until I very nearly was not another student at the University of New Hampshire. I may have explored some boundaries. They did keep me around to contribute to the school's very first class on the internet. I was a contributor to the textbook, first edition textbook for that class on the internet. And before I graduated, I was a chief technologist for a company trying to become the Spanish Amazon.com. None of you have heard of that. Obviously, it was not successful. But I did end up on the cover of PC Week magazine, which was kind of amazing. So I'm standing here a long time ago, throwing some certificates in front of a waterfall. I told you I did work for the Navy for a little over a decade, but I've worked for some of New Hampshire's most iconic employers, the Timberland Boot Company, Phillips Exeter Academy, which is home of the original Facebook. Some of you might know that. But along the way, I write constantly about InfoSec, just as a way to get ideas to paper. But no one ever really read any of that stuff, except this. This was a project I did on thrift store hard drives. This ended up as the top story on Reddit hacking for a day, which, I mean, that was sort of some validation that this work I'm putting in was actually reaching somebody. This is another claim to fame I might have. I had a coworker who never locked their workstation, so I replaced their wallpaper with WannaCry. Well, not real WannaCry, it's wallpaper, but that tweet was seen 338,000 times and made the Telegraph. Honestly, though, if I had a one-page resume, I would say this is it. I have no idea why Taylor Swift follows me on Twitter. This is a very small, as you can see, she only follows a very small population of people compared to the 250,000 people who follow this really incredible account. Just absolutely grateful for everything that Taylor does for our industry. Anyway, getting on to it now, we're here to talk about the Navy. Here's a picture of our Navy. It's our Navy in World War II. This is a shot of my grandfather fighting in World War II. When I had the opportunity to go work for the Navy, that was a very powerful personal connection. I think everybody needs that to get up and go do a job like the jobs that those of us in Infosec have to do every day. So fast forwarding, this is a picture of a submarine. This is a submarine in dry dock. Dry dock is basically a giant box, float a submarine into it, drain the water out, and then you have access to pretty much every piece of the submarine you need to access. I was an IBM contractor for the U.S. Navy submarine maintenance program. And so you can see submarines they're massively large, they're massively complex. They're basically small cities that float underwater. They don't come up for awful long periods of time. They contain highly sensitive systems, as you can imagine. They are nuclear by nature. Invariably, those things do have to come in for an oil change, let's say. I can't get real specific about what we did with those, but when they come in, you want to make the most of that time. And that maintenance is coordinated with human maintenance planners, and people, by far, are the most important part of this process. But a piece of software that my team built and maintained helped augment that decision making. And so, as you can imagine, that piece of software had access and insight into some things that bad actors would probably want to get their hands on. And so you might ask, well, I hope there's some structure around keeping that stuff safe. And guess what? There is. We have such a short amount of time today, I'm going to cruise through this list. And I'm not going to do probably nearly enough justice to any of these topics, but let's give it a shot. So the first thing that we have are just accredited systems. These are systems that are certified by someone. We have these accreditation packages that are full of artifacts, full of documents, checklists, things we'll talk about in a moment. They're mandatory. Such as STIGs. Okay, so is anyone here familiar with STIGs? These are implementation guides. They're built by the government. Basically prescribe how to secure like every facet of a piece of software, an operating system. They're arduous and lengthy, but by design they're kind of brilliant because you don't have to think much. You just kind of do what the checklist says. We also have mandatory scans to validate our efforts against those STIGs. And those scans have to be done at regular intervals. They can't be too stale to be part of the accreditation package. In the Navy, we have COTS restrictions, commercial off-the-shelf software restrictions. You can't just install anything. Like private enterprise, kind of anything goes. But here in the Navy, it's cumbersome, it's frustrating, but it's very, very consistent, department to department. You're all kind of running the same thing. Maybe all of it's old, but at least it's all the same. You have kind of a baseline. PKI, this is the big one. We had mandatory signing and encrypting of email. We had PKI logon. These are things we were doing 15 years ago that industry today still can't seem to solve. We had NMCI, common perimeter for Department of the Navy. Just as I started, every department of the Navy was kind of defending their own house. They had their own firewall, their own networking gear. They were all seeing threats individually. NMCI came and wrapped a giant cocoon around all of that. It frustrated some people because your hop from here to that chair might now go really far away and then come back. But there was a huge economy of scale there, from a network security perspective. In 8570, the Workforce Improvement Program, this prescribed that not all, but most people on a given government contract or in a government IT position in general had to have a certain security certification. If you think back to the guy throwing those certificates in front of the waterfall, you're thinking, that guy didn't think much of certificates, what are you talking about? You're right. Certifications do not guarantee competency, but they give you some chance of awareness. Right? So you see the government is trying to hit all angles here. We're trying to hit the technology, we're trying to hit the people at the same time. It's very thoughtful. Fast forwarding to hospitals. All right, there's so many anecdotes in a hospital. It's frustrating to say this, but where do you start? You can pick anything. This is something that popped up during the creation of this presentation. By the way, this is not cool breaking news. This is an old story. Any one of you who find this online, this actually happened a while ago, so not letting anything out of the bag here, but this could be any vendor. I don't mean to pick on Philips particularly, but sorry, Philips, we're going to do it today. This is a Philips IntelliSpace PACS system. This is where we keep the pictures, basically. This is an extremely expensive system, as you can imagine. If any of you have had any imaging done, you know, the equipment's expensive. This guy's interpreting the imagery. This guy's expensive. The thing in his hand, very expensive. You, as a patient, pay a lot for this procedure. Generalist is a very high-stakes application that you need running in your hospital at all times. It's also a lights-out vulnerable product. You can see CVSS score of 10. Remotely exploitable, low skill, public exploits available. This has everything you do not want to see in a mission-critical application, particularly one in a hospital. And it's certainly one you do not want to have on the internet. Whoops. Those are real. Those are real. I've personally checked out a couple of these. Maybe honeypots. At least one of them is not. These are really online. There may or may not be a good reason for that. I think you can see maybe one takeaway, and we'll get into this in a minute. If there's one skill in a hospital that's absolutely imperative, it's firewall. Above all else, you need to watch that front door. But we see this just time and time again. Vendors dropping absolutely vulnerable systems into our hospitals. Clinical devices and systems that out of the box are as bad as the one we're talking about here. Just this past summer, I had a vendor bring a box into my hospital. Out of the box, vulnerable to WannaCry. WannaCry was a year and a half ago from this past summer. Why is this happening? It's happening because it can happen. Nothing says it can't. And to be practical, hospitals have not educated their vendors on this topic sufficiently. Why is this so challenging? I feel like we're done. I feel like that last slide was everything. I feel like we don't have to talk. I mean, let's drill into it though. Why is InfoSec so challenging in a hospital? Security is new to us. It really is. I started as an analyst in my hospital in January. Most hospitals don't have fully mature cybersecurity programs. It's a reality of the industry. It's not baked into our cultures, our budgets, our headcounts. It is. It's happening now. But this is a slowly evolving process. And we're old and we're big, and these are, right, I mean, you can't lay on these as excuses. There are lots of old and big companies. My hospital began operations like in the late 1800s. So there's something to be said for the momentum of a culture that's been around that long. It's just a reality, for better or worse. But here's the thing, we have no economies of scale. Every hospital is on an island, solving problems in its own way, procuring its own unique firewall solution, its own DLP, its own AV stack. We're sort of self-accrediting our systems according to, I don't know, all kinds of random frameworks. You know, at the DOT, you kind of had one framework to go with. You went with a DITSCAP, or you went with DIACAP, or maybe you went with NIST. Here in a hospital, it's like, you pick ISO, you pick iTrust, you might pick NIST, you might pick your own. It's hard to speak a common language at a certain level. This is the big one though. Patient care is our priority. It's priority number one. Human life is number one in a hospital. That means security best practice and security idealism has to be number two. That is so difficult to reconcile. as a technologist. What really hurts us, though, is mythology. Our industry has a lot of this, and myths like, well, our solution can't be patched, and you can't put AV on it because it's FDA approved. We hear this all the time. FDA actually had to issue a bulletin because this was so pervasive. It has infected the minds of clinicians, it has infected the minds of technologists, vendors alike. It's simply not true. You actually can put AV on a clinical device. They actually want you to do that. There's another one we hear. Well, it runs Windows embedded, so it's secure. Well, that's great. That's great for the 2 people in my hospital that probably actually have physical access to this very specialized clinical device. So the odds of one of those 2 people actually being my threat actor are like, they're not even here. Right? But the real problem with systems is they're vulnerable out of the box to things like WannaCry, which Windows 7 embedded is vulnerable with WannaCry. So I've actually seen some Windows 7 embedded solutions that are pure obfuscation. You are like 2 clicks away from the actual operating system. It's a story we hear over and over. Okay, and then vendors come back and say, okay, you can run antivirus, but you got to whitelist these files and these file locations, and these file extensions. You got to whitelist this stuff. Well, guess what? I've been told to do these very things. Whitelist Perl, whitelist the Windows executable for Apache, whitelist Java, not by file hash, but by file name. This is pure theater. This is a box check. It solves nothing. I actually did not do this. I'm telling you, I was vendor instruct our hospital to do this very thing. It's not all bad necessarily. A lot's bad, right? We have some voluntary partnerships. I think the theme here is that we don't have a lot of structure flowing south to us, mandatory structure flowing south. We do have voluntary partnerships, things like the NHISAC, the NCIC, NEISF, that's my New England Regional Hospital Partnership. We actually meet quarterly. Security technologists, New England hospitals get together. But we don't all participate equally. Again, it's not required that we even communicate with each other. It's just something that we thought to do to bolster our own defenses. You just don't see the formal accountability here like we saw in the DoD. We haven't really talked much, again, it's such a quick talk, but we haven't talked much about the FDA or HIPAA. Those are very focused pieces of regulation that touch only very specifically a medical device or PHI. The reality is, not every device in a hospital is a medical device that touches a human being. Not every device in a hospital actually has PHI. Look at your perimeter firewall, for example. No one cares about your perimeter firewall. Well, that's crazy. I think we already saw it's probably the most important device in your entire enterprise. All right, every time I see this, I freak out. I'm going to try not to freak out today. I mean, I'm just trying to understand if my hospital can afford AV that actually works. So we can operate on hearts, deliver babies. And our government is investing in things like helicopters and training jets, giving contractors $1 billion, $10 billion for some cloud, Humvees that look like excavators, $1 billion for space rockets. Can my industry get something besides the threat of penalties if we're breached? And we were probably breached in the first place because we didn't have the resources to protect ourselves. Right, all that money you see up there, just a fraction of that converted into services or structure would go a long way. All right, what can we do till then? I've seen glimmers of hope at the federal level, but nothing I can pack into this presentation because it's all kind of hearsay. It's all very early. I see the very beginnings of some interest in this, but we're going to have to tread some water for a while. So let's get right to our 5 key takeaways. I actually have 6 Avengers up there, so Let's do 6 key takeaways. Save time, I think. Okay, what can we do for now? We got to hold our vendors accountable, and that's kind of this token phrase, but we need to make them answer difficult questions and get those answers in writing. That is a very powerful vehicle for changing their minds about things that may or may not be true. I think we saw the FDA mythology before. Hospitals need to, at this stage in time, need to be their own advocates for security. You need to make them care. That's a little depressing, but that's the state of affairs. Use the stakes we already have. A lot of federal resources went into developing these documents. Even if you only use a fraction of these, you are so much better off than not. And there are tools that will audit your compliance against these stakes. They are great starting points for anyone who touches infrastructure. You know, maybe the greater the greater lesson is don't wait for someone to tell you to do something that, say, the Navy has been doing for 15 years, like PKI. Start your own program. Don't wait for federal regulation. Make it your culture. Make your vendors follow your lead. All right, segment your network, invest in firewall. We kind of covered that at this point. Not just firewall technology, but I mean firewall skills. I think at the Swift on Security account, if you follow that on Twitter, you understand how resourceful that individual is. Skills are a huge part of this. So don't be so consumed with the product side of things. You can go a long way with what's already out there, kind of in the open source area, or maybe even with tools you already have. Make friends at other hospitals. Let hospitals be competitive up here. By nature, they're going to be. But down here in the trenches, where we're all just trying to stay in business, I don't see anything wrong with that partnership. And I have powerful partnerships regionally with other folks, with other security analysts just like me. We're able to take the best of what each other does, and we're both better because of it. And I think it's important to have organizations that facilitate those relationships. And be honest. Practically speaking, security solutions at a scale for a hospital are very, very expensive. And last thing we need is an ecosystem flooded with products that don't really work, that are very expensive. There's no problem being candid about what might have been a regrettable decision from a product point of view, but accept it and move on and be candid. So I don't have anything to plug here. This is me on Twitter, but if I can leave you with one anecdote, really one message, I guess, it's that hospitals are uniquely in the business of preserving human life, and we as taxpayers invest heavily in the defense of our military's IT resources, but not those of our nation's hospitals. The military has access to vast resources, and those get converted into very well-defined, holistic security requirements. We cannot say the same for healthcare. And the status quo needs to change. I don't know exactly how that will happen, but I'm hopeful that talks like the one I'm giving today are a piece of that puzzle. Thank you all for coming out. Really appreciate it. Seeing you. I've left us exactly 30 seconds for questions. Thanks again. Yes?